Hi guys. So this, I think, is going to be one of those videos where I just kind of sit here and talk at you, and you're probably thinking, darling, is that not every single video you've ever made? Which, yes, true enough, but I just mean this video might end up being more conversational than informational, because it's a topic I find very interesting, and it's one that just has a lot of back and forth to it. Also, for some reason, October, consistently since I've started making videos, October is the month where my view counts just nosedive. Like every October on the dot. I don't know if it's a me thing, if it's a YouTube thing, but to be clear, that's not a complaint. I'm not complaining. What I mean to say is that I kind of like to use October as a month to just kind of do whatever I want. Because why not, right? But anyways, hi. If you do happen to be new here, this is my channel where I like to discuss topics related and pertaining to the wonderful world of fashion dolls. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. Specifically, I want to talk about what the differences are between a fashion doll and an action figure. And I mean far beyond just the typical dolls are for girls, action figures are for boys thing, because we're better than that here. So at their base core, their fundamentals, right? Fashion dolls and action figures are basically the same thing. They are toys made in the likeness of human beings, usually ranging in age from teenagers to adults. But beyond that, what are the basic definitions of each? Wiktionary defines fashion doll as a doll, whether a child's toy or a collectible, designed to be dressed in fashionable clothes. And then it defines action figure as a children's toy in the form of a posable plastic figurine of a character, often from a movie, video game, or television program, with moving parts and often capable of some form of spring-loaded movement. It is used to distinguish from dolls, which have acquired the reputation as a girl's toy, whereas action figures are more marketed towards boys. Now, what did I just say, Wiktionary? But it does give us a starting point. Fashion dolls, their primary focus is being able to dress them up. Action figures, their primary focus is posability. Seems simple enough, there's our answer. But I don't know. I'm not convinced. I need to go deeper. I always need to go deeper. Because it really isn't always that simple. G.I. Joes, for example, despite having the dress-up quality, they're action figures. Monster High, despite being modeled after characters and being very posable, they're fashion dolls. The lines, they're blurry, they're ill-defined. But let's talk about G.I. Joe for a moment. Way back in 1989, 3 federal judges determined that, in the context of import tariffs, Hasbro legally had to classify G.I. Joes specifically as dolls, not action figures. And there's an article from the Associated Press that goes into it a little more. So, to quote the article, last year, Hasbro argued before the U.S. Court of International Trade in New York that G.I. Joe is just an updated version of the traditional toy soldier and should not be subject to the duties placed on imported dolls. Although he wears military duds, brandishes a submachine gun, and lugs an assault pack, both the trade court and the appeals court ruled that Joe fit the standard definition of a representation of a human being used as a child's plaything. In other words, a doll. G.I. Joe is still one of the guys, said Donald Robbins, Hasbro Vice President and General Counsel. Boys know who he is. 10-year-old Michael Ritchie of Allenwood, Texas, who has about 40 G.I. Joe figures, was skeptical. It's not really a doll, he said. It'd be weird for me if I saw a girl playing with G.I. Joe, because I never have. Girls usually play with a doll or something. When introduced 25 years ago, G.I. Joe was a pioneer in the marketing of flexible plastic figurines to boys. Hasbro was always careful to refer to him either as a mannequin or action figure, never a doll. So beyond the whole for boys, for girls thing, there's another obvious implication here, right? That being a doll is somehow shameful, almost. That G.I. Joe should be embarrassed to be labeled a doll. And that's like a big stereotype for people, especially men who collect action figures, right? That calling them dolls will offend them and belittle their hobby. And I feel like that's true for some doll collectors too that I see. They'll say, like, they're not just dolls, they're figures, as if it, like, lessens the shame of it, you know? By the way, did you know that the term action figure was coined specifically by Hasbro in order to differentiate their G.I. Joe products from dolls? According to Art Publica magazine in their article History of Collectible action figures have been around since the 1960s. The phrase action figure was coined by Don Levine of Hasbro in 1964. Levine used the term to distinguish Hasbro's G.I. Joe figures, intended for boys, from dolls, which were then seen as better suited to girls. And Stan Weston, who is credited as the inventor of G.I. Joe, specifically cites the success of Barbie as an inspiration. So what Hasbro did, they literally intentionally designed something that was a doll that would later be legally classified as one, but they called it by a different name because they thought parents would look at these toys, look at these adult men with weapons and army outfits and whatever, and they wouldn't buy them for their sons because they were called dolls. And the thing is, Hasbro was probably right in thinking that. In 1965, a company called Roscoe Industries produced a toy line called Johnny Hero, and he was kind of the same thing, a doll, but aimed at boys. And since the term action figure was still in its infancy, he was specifically called a boy's doll, and that came with some negative connotations. Side note, the photo that Wikipedia uses for its page on action figures is insane. Like, this is just a bizarre selection, including Barbie and Kitten too. The rabbit hole deepens, I guess. And now, keep all that in mind when we take a look at Monster High. So on the surface, Monster High is very ostensibly a fashion doll brand. I'm not debating that fact, but Monster High has a lot of the hallmarks of what we associate with action figures. 1, posability. 2, the characters have an associated media series. 3, the characters themselves often have abilities, superpowers almost, that they're heavily associated with. And 4, although fashion is a big focus of the brand, it's not the sole appeal. Rather, it's more in the form of buying the characters as opposed to buying their clothes. And there's a really interesting reason for that. So, the creator of Monster High, Garrett Sander, all it takes is one little scroll through his Instagram, and you will see that Sander is a huge nerd. And I say that with all of the love and affection in my heart. He talks a lot about how he grew up with comics and superheroes and action figures, toy lines like He-Man and X-Men. And it's very clear, to me at least, all of that played a really big role in Monster High's inception. And also a huge role in Monster High's success, too. I think the way Garrett approached Monster High, its marketing, its media, was really smart. And it's just a cool circle of life moment, I guess, to think that one of the biggest action figure brands in the world only exists because of fashion dolls. And one of the biggest fashion doll brands in the world only exists because of action figures. So really, even though fashion doll and action figure are just marketing terms more than actual descriptors, it's like I said, the line is really difficult to draw. They're not even two entirely separate industries. They exist alongside each other. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I find it incredibly fascinating, especially as someone who, like Garrett Sander, kind of grew up in both of those worlds. You know, I've always loved dolls, I've always loved fashion, but I've always loved comics and superheroes too. And it's weird because when it came to dolls, I never felt like I had to sacrifice my enjoyment of quote unquote boy things to enjoy them. I never felt alienated by Barbie because I also watched X-Men Evolution or played Tekken. But when it came to these, again, quote unquote boy things, it was extremely alienating and isolating to also have an interest in dolls. Or not even just dolls, but the female characters. Like, trying to find toys of Wonder Woman or the Pink Ranger was often an ordeal. I loved these things, these shows, but I never really felt like my specific tastes or interests were being catered to. I just kind of existed there on the sidelines. And that's still kind of true today, which is part of why I'm not a big figure collector. Well, that and collecting both figures and dolls would be really expensive. But McFarlane Toys, for example, makes what? 3 female figures a year, and 2 of them are just Wonder Woman in the ugliest costume you've seen in your life. And that's like a very personal experience. I get it. I doubt a lot of you out there relate to that, and that's fine. Again, I am just kind of talking. But something else that's interesting is that a lot of companies have also very intentionally blurred the lines between fashion doll and action figure, specifically as a marketing gimmick. Probably the most influential example of this, She-Ra, Princess of Power. Now, She-Ra is often classified as a fashion action doll, which is to say, they're superheroes, but they're also pretty ladies with long brushable hair. It's just funny to think about how the term action figure was created to make dolls more marketable to boys, and now they're going back and trying to turn action figures into something more marketable to girls. Do you see what I mean? Like, gendered marketing in general is just one of my favorite things to talk about, and this is just endlessly fascinating to me. But some more examples. One that's a little more obscure, in the early 2000s, around 2002 or 2003, I think, Moby Dick Toys released a line called Capcom Queens, a series of figures based on iconic female characters from various Capcom franchises, and these are referred to as dollgures. I do have one of these, actually. Cammy here, she's my longtime Street Fighter main. So they look kind of just like your basic action figure, right? They even have this sculpted hair instead of rooted hair. But they have removable fabric outfits, and their bodies are made of a soft plastic with kind of an armature in there, which makes them posable without having visible articulation. A more recent example too, DC Superhero Girls, which again were specifically made to be a hybrid between an action figure and a traditional fashion doll, as a way to kind of bridge the gap, blur the lines, and make things like comics and superheroes more accessible to young girls. So even though they are fashion dolls with brushable hair and fashions you can dress them up in, they're also made with sturdier, more muscular bodies with an emphasis on posability, which I think are things you can do with any doll, and kind of reinforces the idea that something is an action figure only because of its proximity to a market traditionally aimed at boys, like superheroes. Which just makes me more curious, as toy marketing becomes less and less gendered over time, which it has a little bit so far. Will we still retain these separate labels? Will their definitions shift around to accompany a new market? Or will we, as a society, eventually become comfortable with calling action figures dolls, and it not being seen as this big, shameful, demeaning label? Also, in 2017, DC Superhero Girls actually won a Toy of the Year award in the category of action figure, but the specific nomination was for the actual, fully plastic action figures and not the full-size dolls. But another thing nominated in that same category for action figure was the Fossil Hunter Lottie doll. And Lottie is, again, very ostensibly a doll brand. Categorically, legally, decidedly, clinically, every way that matters, Lottie is a doll. And then, if we look at the nominees for Doll of the Year, you'll see another Lottie, Stargazer Lottie. Two different products under the same brand, one classified as a doll and another as an action figure. And I just have to wonder what was the justification, of putting one in one category and one in the other. These are the hard-hitting questions that keep me up at night. Also, I just want to say, Project MC Squared was robbed in the doll category at the 2017 Toy of the Year Awards. Okay, they should have won. Another example that I can think of that adds an interesting layer to this conversation, Lego Friends. I love Lego Friends. I will defend Lego Friends to the ends of this earth. But it is interesting that the figures used in the Lego Friends sets, and also I think the Disney sets too, they are referred to as mini dolls, where the regular square blocky Lego people are mini figures. And yes, Lego on paper is a gender neutral toy, but pre-Lego Friends, it had a very strong public perception of being a boy's toy. And even post-Lego Friends too, because now you have people thinking it's just been split into boy Lego and girl Lego. So, boy Lego, figures. Girl Lego, dolls, even though they're the same thing, the same exact thing that serves the same exact purpose. They're just shaped a little different. And I hope this doesn't come off as me saying that the label action figure alone is sexist or misogynistic or even unnecessary, because it does absolutely serve a purpose. Like, I am not going on a campaign to start calling all action figures dolls to prove some grand point, because I don't think I even have a point to prove. I just have a lot of thoughts about very specific things. Because even though the term action figure started out as just a marketing term to avoid being categorized specifically as a fashion doll, the toy market has advanced so much in the years since. There's different types of action figures, just like there's different types of dolls, right? Fashion doll is probably the most intertwined with action figure, but it's just one type of doll. I wouldn't call Spider-Man here a fashion doll any more than I would call Miss Baby Alive an action figure. Or, actually, now that I've said that, I'm like, can I call a baby doll an action figure? If it's, articulated and has actions? But that still leaves us with the big question, right? What is the big difference between dolls and action figures? And the answer I've come to after all that talking really is more or less what I said at the very beginning of this video. One is aimed at boys, one is aimed at girls. You can design a toy that is in every way a fashion doll, even in the most traditional sense, but put it in the quote-unquote boys market and it becomes an action figure. Design a toy that's a superhero. Give her a laser rifle and rippling abs and everything, but target her to girls and she's a doll. But I guess at the end of the day, it matters most to the person who's buying them, right? I buy dolls, I'm a doll collector. An action figure collector will buy action figures. But I do think there's a certain amount of power in just acknowledging where exactly these labels come from, why they're used, and how they might contribute, maybe some unconscious biases. Like if someone says doll, and that conjures up something negative and demeaning in their minds, but action figure conjures something cool and aspirational, we should unpack that. And maybe the reverse exists too. I don't know. Maybe there's someone out there who just gets chills and breaks out into hives when someone calls fashion dolls action figures. We can unpack that too. This is an equal opportunity unpacking channel. As long as it pertains to the subject, please don't unpack your trauma in my comment section. That's fun for no one. So yeah, I think that more or less brings me to the end of the video. I think I've said everything I wanted to. If I didn't, oh well, that's on me. But I certainly feel like I've talked enough. But now it's your turn. Like I said, this is a conversation, so feel free to contribute to it. Tell me, in your opinion, what's the difference between dolls and action figures? Do you think there are actually pretty significant differences, or no real differences? Where do you think you fit into it as a collector, if you are one? And how do these terms affect your purchasing decisions? Please, spare me no details. And when you're done with all of that, just be sure to like and subscribe for any future Fashion Doll content. Thank you.